Good morning, students. Today we are going to continue our discussion with the very important topic under the heading Human Health and Diseases. Now we are going to talk about immunity. So children, talking about the immunity, what is immunity? Immunity is the ability of the body to fight against the disease causing agent, right? So the ability of the host body to fight against the disease causing agent is known as immunity, right? Talking about the immunity, so immunity is of two types. The first one is the innate immunity and second one is the acquired immunity. Let us first talk about the innate immunity. Children, when we talk about the innate immunity, so it refers to all the defense elements with which an individual is born and always able to protect the body, right? And it is a non-specific type of defense system, right? So it is present from the time of birth and inherited from the parent, right? Children, talking about the innate immunity, so innate immunity consists of various barriers which prevent the entry of microorganisms into the body, and it consists of four types of barrier system that prevent the entry of pathogen, like the entry of foreign element into the body. So let us talk about the different barriers of the body, right? So there are four categories of barrier. What are those four categories? First one is the physical barrier, second one is the physiological barrier, third one is the cellular barrier, and fourth one is the cytokines, right? So first we will talk about the physical barriers. So what are physical barriers? Like for example, skin. Skin is the first line of mucus coating on defense. It prevents the entry of the pathogens of the body. Mucus coating on the epithelial lining, the respiratory, gastrointestinal and urogenital tract also help in trapping microbes. So skin is the physical barrier of our body which is present since birth, right? ये जो skin होती है ये एक physical barrier है जो by birth present होता है, right? It is the defense mechanism which is present since birth, right? Why skin is a barrier system of defense system? Because it prevents the entry of microorganism, it prevents the entry of pathogen into our body, right? Let us talk about the second category, that is physiological barrier. Children, acid in the stomach, saliva in the mouth, tears from the eyes. So these are what? They prevent the entry of microorganisms in our body. They prevent the microbial growth in our body, right? So that is why they are the physiological barriers. You have studied about the acid which is present in our body. Which acid is present in our stomach? Yes, it is HCl, right? So HCl, saliva which contain ptyalin enzyme, right? Tears of our eyes. So they are the physiological barriers which actually prevent the microbial growth in our body, and they are present by the time of birth. So that is why they are comes under the category of innate immunity, because they are present by birth. The third category is the cellular barriers. A special type of cells which is present in our body and which kill the disease causing agent, right? So those cells comes under the category of cellular barrier. Like for example, WBC, we all are aware, white blood corpuscles, lymphocytes, polymorpho nuclear leukocytes, right? Like neutrophils, monocytes, macrophages. So they are what? They are the cell which actually fight against the pathogen. So, and all these cells are present in our body by the time of birth. Since birth it is present in our body. That is why this mechanism comes under the category of innate immunity, because they fight against the disease. That is why it is a part of immune system. because it is present by the time of birth. That is why it comes into the category of innate immunity. Let us talk about the fourth type of barrier, which is cytokine. Right? Children, cytokine barrier are what? They are the cells which are virus infected. ध्यान से सुनो. They are the cell which are virus infected and release a type of protein which is known as interferon, right? Which protect non-infected cell from the further viral infection, right? Cytokine barriers क्या होते हैं? ये वायरस इन्फेक्टेड सेल होते हैं हमारी बॉडी से, जिनसे कुछ स्पेशल टाइप के प्रोटीन रिलीज होते हैं जिन्हें इंटरफेरॉन कहा जाता है. और इंटरफेरॉन का इंपॉर्टेंट काम होता है कि जो नॉन इन्फेक्टेड सेल होते हैं हमारी बॉडी के, उनको फर्दर इन्फेक्शन से बचाया जा सके. एंड दैट कैपेसिटी इज प्रेजेंट बाय द टाइम ऑफ बर्थ. That is why it is a kind of barrier of innate immunity. Got it? Now let us talk about the acquired immunity. Children, talking about the acquired immunity, so it is a pathogen specific, right? And it is not present since the time of birth and developed during the individual's lifetime. So that kind of immunity is known as acquired immunity, because it is not present by the time of birth. It is developed during the individual's lifetime, right? And it is a pathogen specific, right? Acquired immunity is the pathogen specific and it is characterized by the memory, right? What are the important characters? Like the very first important character is the specificity, right? And the second important character is the memory. Now, specificity is what? Children, it is the ability to distinguish many different foreign molecules accordingly. So that is very important characteristic property of acquired immunity. They have the ability, this kind of immunity has the ability to distinguish many different kind of foreign substances, right? And the second important characteristic of acquired immunity is the memory, right? So it is acquired immunity is characterized by the memory. Memory is what? It is a unique feature which help in producing an intensive response when the pathogen attacks the second time, right? जब पहली बार कोई पैथोजन अटैक करता है तो हमारी बॉडी का इम्यून सिस्टम उसको मेमोराइज कर लेता है ताकि जब सेकेंड एनकाउंटर हो तो उसके अगेंस्ट फाइट किया जा सके, राइट? सो दीज टू इम्पॉर्टेंट कैरेक्टर आर द characteristic feature of the acquired immunity. Acquired immunity is the pathogen specific immunity. It is not present from the birth, it develops during an individual's lifetime, right? And after responding to the foreign microorganism and elimination of the pathogen, the immune system keep the memory of that encounter, right? The primary response that was. And during its second encounter with the same pathogen, producing a highly intensified immune response that is known as the secondary response. Got it? Memory system के basis पर जो immunity work करती है. Like for example, अगर कोई pathogen body पर attack करता है first time, so that जो उसके response में जो हमारा immune system जो response करता है वो कहलाती है primary response. और हमारी बॉडी का इम्यून सिस्टम हमें उससे बचा लेता है. जब सेकेंड एनकाउंटर होता है उसी पैथोजन का, तो जो रेस्पॉन्स हमारा बॉडी का इम्यून सिस्टम देता है, इट वॉज वेरी इंटेंसिव, राइट? इट इज़ हाईली इंटेंसिफाइड इम्यून रिस्पॉन्स एंड दैट highly intensified immune response is known as secondary response. Got it? If we talk about the immune responses, what are the immune responses? Two categories: primary immune response and secondary immune response. Primary immune response: immunity developed in the body due to the first encounter with an antigen, right? Takes a longer time to develop. It is feeble and declined rapidly. Talking about the secondary immune response, it is produced by the memory cell formed during the primary response. जब primary response का जो memorize किया जाता है, उसके response में जो secondary response होती है, that is known as secondary immune response, and it is heightened immune response in a shorter time. जो primary response होती है वो respond करने में ज़्यादा time लेता है, और जो secondary response होती है immune response वो very rapid होता है, right? Stay for the longer time, right? So this is the difference between the primary immune response and the secondary immune response. Now children, the primary and the secondary immune response are carried out with the help of two special type of cells, right, which is present in our blood. That is B lymphocyte and T lymphocyte. Talking about the B lymphocyte produce an army of the protein in response to pathogen into our blood to fight with them, that is known as antibodies. जो B lymphocyte cells होते हैं वो B lymphocytes हमारी बॉडी में प्रोटीन्स की आर्मी को डेवलप करते हैं जो कि एंटीबॉडीज कहलाती हैं. मतलब B lymphocyte का काम होता है हमारी बॉडी में एंटीबॉडीज को जनरेट करना. एंड द सेकेंड कैटेगरी इज द T lymphocyte. T cells का क्या काम होता है? The T cells themselves do not produce any kind of antibody, but they help B cells to produce them. B lymphocyte का वर्क होता है कि हमारी बॉडी में एंटीबॉडीज को जनरेट करें, और T lymphocytes खुद कोई एंटीबॉडी जनरेट नहीं करते. ये B lymphocyte को एनकरेज करते हैं कि वो एंटीबॉडीज को प्रोड्यूस करें, राइट. दे एक्चुअली, इन अ वेरी सिंपल वर्ड्स वी कैन से दैट T lymphocyte help the B lymphocyte to generate or to produce antibodies. So let us talk about the antibody, that what are antibodies. Children, talking about the antibodies, so it is a type of protein molecule produced by the B lymphocyte in response to pathogen, as I just mentioned, right. एंटीबॉडीज क्या होते हैं? एंटीबॉडी एक खास तरीके के प्रोटीन होते हैं जिन्हें बी लिम्फोसाइट प्रोड्यूस करता है इन द रिस्पॉन्स ऑफ पैथोजन. जब हमारी बॉडी पे किसी पैथोजन का अटैक होता है तो हमारी बॉडी कुछ स्पेशल काइंड के प्रोटीन, हमारी बॉडी का इम्यून सिस्टम कुछ स्पेशल टाइप के प्रोटीन्स को प्रोड्यूस करता है. ये प्रोटीन क्या कहलाते हैं? एंटीबॉडीज, राइट. And children, T cell do not secrete antibodies directly. However, they help B cell to produce them, as I just mentioned. And each antibody molecule have 4 peptide chain, as it is shown in this picture. That each antibody, हर एक antibody में 4 peptide chain होती हैं. This is 1, this is 2, this is 3, and this is 4. So 4 peptide chains are there. Right? Out of these 4 chain, 2 chains are light chain. इन 4 chain में से जो 2 chain होती हैं वो light chain कहलाती है. जो छोटी chain है, these are the light chain, and it is abbreviated as L2. And 2 large chains are called heavy chain. और ये जो 2 large chain आपको दिख रही हैं ये heavy chain कहलाती है. They are abbreviated as H2. तो 2 हैवी चेन होती हैं और 2 लाइट चेन होती है. हेंस एंटीबॉडी इज रिप्रेजेंटेड एज H2L2, राइट. एंड ऑल दीज चेन्स बाइंड टुगेदर बाय द डाइसल्फाइड बॉन्ड. और ये जो चेन्स होती हैं ये डाइसल्फाइड बॉन्ड के थ्रू एक दूसरे से बाइंड रहती हैं. Now children, antibodies are also called as immunoglobulins. एंटीबॉडीज को बायोलॉजिकली, टेक्निकली इम्यूनोग्लोबिन कहा जाता है और इसे Ig से रिप्रेजेंट किया जाता है. एंड डिफरेंट टाइप ऑफ एंटीबॉडीज आर प्रोड्यूस्ड इन अवर बॉडीज लाइक IgA, IgM, IgE, IgG, राइट. जैसे IgA की अगर हम बात करते हैं तो A stands for alpha, immunoglobulin alpha, and it is the second most prevalent antibody, right. And it is 15% of the total antibodies in our body, and it is found in the colostrum, which is the breast milk for the newborn, and it is found in our nose, eyes, lungs, right. So that is the antibody which is present in such parts. Talking about the IgM, so it is the third most important antibody, and it constitutes 5 to 10% of total antibodies, and they are responsible for the blood transfusion reactions in the ABO blood system, right. Talking about the IgE, IgE is the least common antibody in our body, and they basically the function is not well understood yet, but basically it involves in the allergic reactions, right. IgG की अगर हम बात करते हैं तो IgG is the most prevalent class of antibody which actually constitute the 75 to 80% of the total antibody, and it protects against fungi, bacteria and toxins, right? And it is very important immunoglobulin of our body. It is responsible for the Rh factor in blood also, right? So in that way it is very important category of the antibody which is present in our body, right? Now children, if you see the top of this structure, so a specific sequence of a specific shape like a lock key pattern is there, right? And that is what it is, the antigen binding site, right? ये जो आप इसका अगर टॉप को ध्यान से देखो तो ये स्पेसिफिक स्ट्रक्चर है जहाँ पे स्पेसिफिक एंटीजन आके अटैच होते हैं, राइट? सो रिस्पॉन्सेज वाया एंटीबॉडीज इज ऑल्सो कॉल्ड एज ह्यूमरल इम्यून रिस्पॉन्सेज, राइट? जो एंटीबॉडीज के थ्रू जो रिस्पॉन्सेज जनरेट होती हैं वो ह्यूमरल इम्यून रिस्पॉन्सेज कहलाती हैं, राइट? नाउ चिल्ड्रन, लेट अस टॉक अबाउट द टाइप ऑफ इम्यूनिटी depending upon the immune cell acting against the antigen, right? So based on the type of immune cells acting against the antigen, the immunity can be classified into two types, right? What are those two types? Humoral immunity, जिसे हम antibody mediated immunity भी कहते हैं, और second category is the cell mediated immunity. अभी मैंने नाम लिया ह्यूमरल इम्यून रिस्पॉन्स. तो एंटीबॉडीज़ के थ्रू जो रिस्पॉन्सेज जनरेट होती हैं, जो इम्यूनिटी जनरेट होती है, वो ह्यूमरल इम्यून रिस्पॉन्स कहलाती है. इसलिए हम इसको एंटीबॉडी मीडिएटेड इम्यूनिटी भी कहते हैं, राइट? सो लेट अस डिस्कस अबाउट बोथ ऑफ देम इन लिटिल मोर डिटेल. Humoral immunity. So the immunity which is mediated by antibodies produced by B lymphocyte is called humoral immunity. Cell mediated immunity, the immunity which is mediated by T lymphocyte by directly attaching themselves to the antigen, that is known as cell mediated immunity, right? So cell mediated responses, cell mediated immunity is mediated by T lymphocyte. It plays an important role in organ of transplantation and is responsible for the body's ability to differentiate between self and non-self organ, right? So during the transplantation, tissue matching and blood group matching are the very essential before undertaking any transplant, right? So the patient has to take immunosuppressant, right? जो हमारी बॉडी का जो सेल मीडिएटेड इम्यूनिटी होती है उसका एक खास प्रॉपर्टी होता है टू रिकॉग्नाइज सेल्फ एंड नॉन सेल्फ सब्सटेंसेस. तो उसकी वजह से ड्यूरिंग द ट्रांसप्लांटेशन, जैसे फॉर एग्जांपल अगर किसी का किडनी ट्रांसप्लांट होना है तो जो नई किडनी लगाई जाती है, जो नई किडनी ट्रांसप्लांट की जाती है, वो एक तरीके से उस पेशेंट के लिए फॉरेन पार्टिकल हो गया, फॉरेन सब्सटेंस हो गया. तो जब कोई नई किडनी ट्रांसप्लांट की किसी पेशेंट में, तो उस पेशेंट का इम्यून सिस्टम उस नई किडनी को एक्सेप्ट नहीं करेगा, क्योंकि वो सेल मीडिएटेड इम्यूनिटी वो रिकॉग्नाइज कर लेता है सेल्फ और नॉन सेल्फ कंपोनेंट, राइट? तो वो उस नई किडनी को एक्सेप्ट नहीं करेगा और उसको डैमेज कर देगा. तो इसलिए ड्यूरिंग द ट्रांसप्लांटेशन डॉक्टर्स क्या करते हैं, इम्यूनोसप्रेसेंट मेडिसिन देते हैं. वो क्या करते हैं, बॉडी के इम्यून सिस्टम को सप्रेस कर देते हैं ताकि बॉडी का इम्यून सिस्टम सेल्फ और नॉन सेल्फ को रिकॉग्नाइज ना कर पाए. इट इज़ वाई cell mediated immunity works during the transplantation, and during the transplantation the immunosuppressant are given to the patient because it actually suppress the ability to differentiate the self and non-self substances, right? So that is why self and non-self and the cell mediated immunity response is responsible for the graft rejection, right? तो जो बॉडी का सेल्फ mediated immune response होता है, it is responsible for graft rejection. ये हमारी बॉडी के foreign substance को reject करता है. So that is why it is a part of immunity, right? So we have discussed about the immunity depending upon the immune cells against the antigen. They are antibody mediated immunity, which is produced by the antibodies, which actually produced antibodies by the B lymphocyte, and cell mediated immunity, which is mediated by T lymphocyte, and that is responsible for body's ability to differentiate between self and non-self organs, right? Now children, if we talk about the immunity, so based on the antibodies, immunity is further divided. अगर हम बात करते हैं depending upon the antibodies, right? So depending upon the antibodies, depending upon the nature of antibodies, immunity is further classified into two groups. The very first category is the active immunity. ये active immunity क्या होती है? It is the immunity developed by the body when it is exposed to antigen, right? Antibodies are produced by the body in this case, right? जब हमारी बॉडी में इम्यूनिटी डेवलप होती है व्हेन इट एक्सपोज टू सम एंटीजन, तो हमारी बॉडी एंटीबॉडीज जनरेट करती है. सो इन दिस केस इट इज अ एक्टिव इम्यूनिटी, राइट? सो इंट्रोडक्शन ऑफ द पैथोजन और द माइक्रोब्स ईदर ड्यूरिंग द इम्यूनाइजेशन or by the infection is the active immunity, right? Children, talking about the active immunity, it is a slow but long lasting process and has no side effect, right? For example, this immunity is basically developed by the vaccination. Immunity is developed by the natural infection, right? So in both the categories there is the active immunity. Active immunity क्या होती है? जब किसी भी पैथोजन के कांटेक्ट में हम आते हैं तो हमारी बॉडी से जो इम्यून सिस्टम रिस्पॉन्स देता है तो वो कहलाता है हमारी बॉडी का एक्टिव इम्यूनिटी, चाहे वो वैक्सीनेशन के दौरान हो चाहे वो नेचुरल इन्फेक्शन की वजह से हो. द सेकेंड कैटेगरी इज द पैसिव इम्यूनिटी. चिल्ड्रन, इट अकर्स व्हेन एंटीबॉडीज आर डायरेक्टली गिवन इनटू द बॉडी, राइट? इट इज यूज्ड व्हेन द इम्यून रिस्पॉन्स हैज टू बी फास्टर, राइट? Like for example, antibodies received by the fetus from the mother through the placenta. So that is the passive immunity. Passive immunity क्या होती है कि जब antibodies को direct insert किया जाता है body में, जैसे antibodies का direct transfer होता है एक mother से उसके child fetus में through the placenta. So it is the passive immunity. Direct antibodies provide हो रहे हैं यहाँ पर. And antibodies in the colostrum, अभी मैंने बात करी थी that IgA rich, which is the breast milk yellowish fluid secreted by the mother during the initial day of lactation, right? So the very first milk of the mother is a very rich in immunoglobulin A. उसमें antibody A बहुत ज़्यादा present होते हैं. So it is what? The antibodies are directly fed up by the children, by the kid through the mother's milk, right? So it is what kind of immunity? It is a passive immunity because antibodies are directly inserted in the child, right? So this is about the passive immunity. So let us talk about the difference between active immunity and passive immunity. Active immunity, antibodies developed by own cells. Antibodies बॉडी खुद डेवलप करती है. पैसिव इम्यूनिटी में क्या होता है? एंटीबॉडीज डेवलप इन अदर वर्टिब्रेट and injected into the our body. पैसिव इम्यूनिटी में एंटीबॉडीज एक्सटर्नली प्रोवाइड किए जाते हैं. एक्टिव इम्यूनिटी में बॉडी खुद जनरेट करती है एंटीबॉडीज. इन एक्टिव इम्यूनिटी टेक्स टाइम टू डेवलप इम्यूनिटी. एक्टिव इम्यूनिटी जो है स्लो प्रोसेस है, टाइम टेकन प्रोसेस है. पैसिव इम्यूनिटी रिस्पॉन्स इज फास्टर. Active immunity stay for longer period and passive immunity stays for short period of time, right? Examples are active immunity का example, immunity developed due to the natural exposure of antigen or by the vaccination, and passive immunity का example, immunity into infant in the colostrum, tetanus, antitoxins. So these are the examples of passive immunity, right? What is the main difference between active immunity and passive immunity? Active immunity, in active immunity the antibodies developed by the body by their own, and in passive immunity antibodies develop in the other organism and injected into our body, right? So this is the difference between active immunity and the passive immunity. Let us talk about the another very important topic, that is vaccination and immunization. Children, as we have already discussed about vaccination and immunization, the basic principle of the immunization is based on the property of memory of the immune system. हालांकि सारा डिटेल में हम लोग डिस्कस कर चुके हैं कि वैक्सीनेशन क्या होता है, इसमें जो वैक्सीन्स दी जाती हैं, राइट? तो ये जो वैक्सीन्स होती हैं, दे आर द माइल्ड पैथोजन विच इज़ इंजेक्टेड इन अवर बॉडी, एंड ऑन द सिस्टम ऑफ मेमोरी the body in the later years it recognize the pathogen and fight against it, right? So this is about the vaccination and immunization. Immunization की अगर हम बात करते हैं तो immunization is the process where performed antibodies against the toxins are introduced in our body, right? जो परफॉर्म्ड एंटीबॉडीज होते हैं वो अगेंस्ट टॉक्सिन हमारी बॉडी में इंजेक्ट किए जाते हैं. जैसे कि कहीं पर अगर स्नेक बाइट है, राइट, तो स्नेक बाइट में एंटीबॉडीज यूज्ड किए जाते हैं अगेंस्ट द स्नेक वेनोम, राइट? सो दिस इज द इम्यूनाइजेशन. दिस इज द डिफरेंस बिटवीन वैक्सीनेशन एंड इम्यूनाइजेशन, राइट? नाउ द नेक्स्ट इंपॉर्टेंट टॉपिक विच वी विल डिस्कस इज एलर्जी. Children, talking about the allergies, so the exaggerated or hypersensitive responses of the immune system to certain agent in the environment is called allergy, and its causing element are allergen. Allergies क्या होती हैं? हमारे immune system की जो exaggerated responses होती हैं, हमारे immune system की जो hypersensitive responses होती हैं to certain antigen, right, that is known as allergy. और इसके जो causing agent होते हैं वो क्या कहलाते हैं? इसके जो causing agent होते हैं वो कहलाते हैं allergens, right? For example, dust, mites, pollens, animal denders, so they are what? They are the allergen जिससे हमें allergy होती है. And the antibodies produced in response to allergen are IgE. अभी मैंने आपको पहले भी बताया था, Ig is the immunoglobulin which is produced for certain allergens, right? And talking about the allergy, it is due to the release of chemicals like histamine and serotonin from the mast cell. So from the mast cell, certain chemicals like histamine and serotonin are released, right? Like talking about the symptom of allergies, so symptom of allergy is sneezing, watery eyes, rashes, running nose, difficulty in breathing. So these are what? They are the symptom for allergy. And the patient is diagnosed by the injecting or exposing the patient is very small doses of allergen, right? एलर्जी का कैसे पता चलता है? किस चीज़ से एलर्जी है ये डायग्नोस करना बड़ा मुश्किल हो जाता है. इसके डायग्नोसिस के लिए क्या होता है कि हम छोटे छोटे अमाउंट में एलर्जेंस प्रोवाइड करते हैं जिससे पता चलता है कि किस एलर्जन की वजह से ये एलर्जी हुई है, राइट? Nowadays, allergies are very common, especially in children's, which is basically due to the high sensitivity and lowering of immunity. आजकल एलर्जी बच्चों में देखने को ज़्यादा मिलती है. क्यों? क्योंकि हाईली सेंसिटिव बॉडी हो गई है एंड द इम्यून सिस्टम इज़ वेरी स्लो. Due to the poor immune system, there is the high risk of allergies in the children, right? Now talking about the another very important topic, that is autoimmunity. Children, talking about the autoimmunity is what? Children, when the immune system of the body is not able to identify or to differentiate between the self and non-self organ, self or non-self particle, so that is known as autoimmunity, right? So it is the state where body loses the ability to distinguish self and non-self elements, right? So the body's immune system goes off the track and start destroying self cells and molecule, right? So this is known as autoimmunity. Autoimmunity क्या होता है? जब बॉडी का इम्यून सिस्टम फेल हो जाता है, इट लूजेस द एबिलिटी टू डिस्टिंग्विश सेल्फ एंड नॉन सेल्फ एलिमेंट. इस केस में क्या होता है? द इम्यून सिस्टम ऑफ द पेशेंट गोज ऑफ द ट्रैक एंड स्टार्ट डिस्ट्रॉइंग द सेल्फ सेल एंड द मॉलिक्यूल. वो अपने ही सेल को डिस्ट्रॉय करने लगता है, राइट? दैट इज नोन एज ऑटो इम्यूनिटी. एंड Autoimmunity is due to the genetic and other unknown reasons, right? So due to that, the body attacks self cells, which result the damage to the body part. So that is known as autoimmune disease. Talking about the example, so rheumatic arthritis is an autoimmune disease, right? उसी तरीके से Hashimoto disease, Addison disease, they are what? They are the autoimmune diseases. इन डिजीज में अपना ही इम्यून सिस्टम अपने ही ऑर्गन को डिस्ट्रॉय करने लगता है. क्यों? क्योंकि इम्यून सिस्टम की कैपेबिलिटी खत्म हो जाती है टू रिकॉग्नाइज सेल्फ एंड नॉन सेल्फ एलिमेंट, राइट? सो दिस इज अबाउट द ऑटो इम्यूनिटी. सो आई होप वट एवर वी हैव डिस्कस्ड टुडे it becomes clear to you, it is clear to you. If you feel any kind of doubt, any kind of query, so just feel free to ask. In the next video, we will discuss about the immune system of our body, right? Till then, have a nice day and thank you.